Hello, everyone. This is Mrs. Brown. Today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about chapters 9 and 10 of All Quiet on the Western Front, and we're going to look at some of the key events that happened, their impact on Paul, and how Remarque is using these events to illustrate some of the major themes of the novel. Chapter 9 opens with this visit from the Kaiser. This is the Grand Kaiser Wilhelm that the boys have been hearing about since they were in school, and the reason supposedly their key figurehead that they're fighting for. And the troops go through a lot of show. There's a lot of practice, a lot of getting dressed out. And then when the Kaiser finally arrives, the boys realize he's just another guy. They're really not that impressed by him. He seems kind of short. He seems very ordinary. Nothing like this grand figure that their teachers and their parents and all of these people had been describing, that they were supposed to be fighting for the honor and glory here. And there's this irony involved that there's millions of people dying in this war over the decisions of maybe about 30 people on either side that are actually the influencers and the decision makers. Then we have this horrific scene where Paul gets trapped out in no man's land. He realizes that he's stuck with enemy fire and fire from his own side coming in too. He ends up diving down and taking shelter in this shell hole from this bomb blast that had gone off before. And then he's in there sheltering when this other guy comes up over the top. Paul realizes it's an enemy soldier, acts purely instinctively in self-defense and stabs the guy. And then he's stuck there with the man who isn't dead yet, but takes a very long time to die, leaving Paul alone to ponder his actions and the mortality of this guy. Now, we've already seen a little bit with Paul. If you remember, there was one brief scene where he went to throw a grenade and he actually locked eyes with one of the other soldiers on the other side, and he couldn't do it for a moment. And then they broke contact, and Paul, instinct and soldier training took over again, and he lobbed the grenade over. But this is the first time that Paul has actually killed up close. And it's really horrifying to him. He actually tries to help the wounded man for a little while, and partly it is out of a human pity and a desire to just help someone who's in need to do the best they can. Partly it's out of guilt that he caused this, and partly out of fear. He recognizes that at any moment he could be captured by the French on the other side, and maybe he could show that he tried to help this wounded soldier and use it as some sort of bartering to save himself if he gets captured. And while he's there and they're stuck there for so long, he actually starts to going through the other man's wallet. And this treats him to see this man that he has come into his shell hole, this enemy soldier, this Frenchman, as even more of an individual. He sees the pictures of this man. He had a wife, he had children, he was a printer, he had a job and a career, and all of these things make it even all the more horrific for Paul to realize that it's not just some random enemy on the other side. This is a very specific individual man, not unlike him, that Paul has actually just stabbed and killed. Paul goes through some pretty dark moments here. He actually lapses in and out of these wild dreams of adopting the Frenchman's identity and going and living out the life that he now feels that he owes back to the world somehow. And we see this, that up close, Paul, and by extension all of us, really cannot be a killer when faced with an individual person, that humanity kicks back in. And we go back to that opening quote that we looked at when we first started the novel, this concept that war is possible only in the abstraction, when it's some random enemy that has no face and is just this person on the other side, then you can do your job as a soldier. But up close and personal, there becomes no purpose, no reason for the killing. After hours and hours with this situation, Paul finally, things calm down, and he makes his way back home, if by home you mean the trench where at least his fellow comrades are. And back in the trench, he actually regains some perspective. He's able to talk just a little bit about what happened. He, of course, doesn't tell them the whole emotional journey that he went through. And Kat and the others reassure him, hey, it's kill or be killed. And Paul, once again, does what so many other soldiers have had to do, which is to push away his own humanity. He can't stop and have the luxury of these kinds of emotions. And he has to sort of shrug his shoulders and say, hey, war is war. This is what happens in war. Now, after the intensity of chapter 9, we get this, again, this kind of roller coaster that we see throughout the books where the chapters alternate. We have a theme, a kind of a quieter chapter, and several of the novel's major themes really are seen very clearly in this chapter. We get this idea of camaraderie as the men bond in different ways. We see again the horrors of war, this time from the hospital perspective. We see the role that chance plays in the lives of these soldiers, and we see just the futility, the uselessness of it, the why on earth are we doing this kind of theme. Chapter 10 opens with a bit of a feast, and the men rejoice in having all this food available. They find 2 suckling pigs, and there's really this kind of funny scene where they start getting shelled, and they're running away and trying to hold on to the pigs, and Paul's still trying to flip pancakes as they go, and they're trying to keep their composure and keep their food together even while these bombs are falling all around them. They find a cat, and they decide to try to adopt it and keep it as a pet. This idea of trying to set up this kind of human connection, the bonds that they're forming, the trust that they have for each other, and this attempt to make a home and a family out of a very unhome-like and very unfamiliar sort of situation. And then we get the wounds. Paul and Kropp are both injured in the leg, and Paul realizes, and Paul actually breaks an arm too, that it was just chance again. Kropp's wound is in just a few inches further down the leg, which means the bone has been shattered, will probably have to be amputated. Paul took a wound in the upper thigh in a more, muscular area where there aren't going to be isn't going to be as much damage, and it'll be something he will heal from. And again, looking at it, it's just a few inches, and what a difference that made. And then they have this opportunity on the train again. You see this friendship developing. Paul actually manages to trade off some cigars and get himself on the same train as Kropp is so that they can stay together. Now, just in case the reader of this book is still harboring some kind of romantic notions that, well, yeah, it's really bad in the trenches, but someplace there's a hospital with a pretty nurse who's, putting cloths on your forehead and taking care of you, Remarque takes the opportunity to show us some of the horrors of the hospital. And we already know a little bit of foreshadowing from Kemmerich's death, that at least on the sidelines, those quick military hospitals are certainly no good. And now we get into this nursing hospital, this Catholic hospital. And again, these are horrific scenes. We see in one place so many of the results of the war. There's all of these separate wards for all the people who have been maimed, all the different types of amputations that have happened. There's people who are blinded from shrapnel and from gas, people who are just dying. They actually have a place called the dying room where they just kind of shove the people they don't think are going to make it. The surgeons seem sadistic. The nurses, there's some of the nurses are cheerful, but a lot of them seem mostly indifferent. They've seen so much suffering. They're slow to respond to the men. So it is definitely not a place of refuge for the men. It just continues to emphasize just how horrific the war has been. And as the author is so good at doing, even in the middle of this, we do find some sort of lighter and humorous moments. He finds the humanity in the middle of this war situation. We meet this character, Joseph, who's got a wound to his head, which everybody thinks he's crazy, and he calls it his shooting license, because it's like he has license to do anything he wants to, and he can't get in trouble for it. We see this guy, Peter, actually come back from the dying room, which no one has seen happen. And there's this funny scene even there with Lewandowski, the Polish soldier, who hasn't seen his wife in 2 years, and she comes to visit. And of course, their husband and wife, they want some privacy, and what the men have to do to kind of get these two a chance to have a romantic moment alone. But after everything that we see in chapter 10, we go back to what's the point of this? Kropp still ends up with his leg amputated. Paul gets sent home to heal for a little while, but like his previous visit, being home is no relief. If anything, his mother is getting worse, and it's even more painful. And at the end of the chapter, where's Paul? Right back on the front lines yet again. And so that concludes today's presentation on Chapter 9 and Chapter 10. We just have a little bit left in the book to finish up, so we'll be discussing some of the symbolism and how the themes are playing out as we get closer to the end of the story. But that's it for this presentation. Good night. Bye.